And I should say, it's also funny. So we shouldn't get bullied.
And we shouldn't get bullied.
We shouldn't get bullied. Who the f is bullying you? So on the one hand, you have people who actually understand basic biology and basic sociology and are fighting for the rights of an oppressed, marginalized group and trans people. And on the other hand, you got Rishi Sunak, the conservatives and so-called gender-critical people in the UK, bruv, and transphobes all over the world, who are trying to strip them of their rights, regularly dehumanize them, make fun of them on a daily basis because of their aesthetic presentation. But they're the ones, oh, we're being bullied because we're the ones who are aggressing on people doing nothing wrong. It's just cry bully bullshit. So unfortunately, the UK, bruv, is a country that exists. It's not a fictional place called the United Kingdom. You know, it's not like Magic Mountain or Universal Studios, you know, Disney World. It's not like that, even though it sounds like it. Bongerland is actually real, and because all they want to do over there is austerity politics by cutting social safety net programs for the poor and unfortunate in society, and they want to cut taxes for the wealthy and deregulate multinational corporations, just like the conservatives in the United States of America, the only real country in the world. Regardless, because they got no other policies than that, we're going after trans people again. Oh boy, we got Rishi Sunak over here talking about trans people because he doesn't want you to look at his other policies that don't actually help you at all and only seem to happen to help the wealthy people, which you are not. You might want to wonder why that is. Let's see what he has to say. Content warning, we're entering Bongerland.
We are going to change this country, and that means life.
Holy, I haven't listened to this man talk in a while. He's a bit fruity. I'm not gonna lie. This guy's a bit fruity. He's kind of twink moding right now. Is this why he's going after trans people? Because he thinks it'll solidify his safety being a gay? Is that what it is, do you think? I mean, frankly, that's more understandable than what the fuck conservatives are usually up to in like a twisted sort of way. Not that it's good, but I can see it more. You know, how somebody's thought processes would make them think that way in a very misguided capacity. He's kind of fruity. I don't know, man.
We are going to change this country.
And we are going to change this country. Okay. Kind of cunty.
And that means life
means life.
Now that shouldn't be a controversial position.
That shouldn't be a controversial position. What a fairy. Anyway, sorry. It's just shocking to me. I'm sorry. Like, I don't know. You can't be sounding like this and then talking shit on queer people. It doesn't work like that. Like, you can't sound gayer than me and be talking shit on gay people. There's like a disconnect there.
The vast majority of hardworking people agree with it. And it also shouldn't be controversial for parents to know what their children are being taught in school about relationships.
Yeah, and they are being taught in school. The parents know that. You could just ask. You could just ask to see the curriculum. You could do that. Now, obviously, when they talk about parents have a right to know what their kids are learning in school, like the reason why they say that is they're talking about in the case of usually abusive households from homophobic or queerphobic parents, if a child understands that their parents are not the biggest fans of queer people, and they understand that their parents have a likelihood to, say, fly off the handle, not even just to the kids, but to each other, or about other things like road rage, for instance. If they understand that their parents are kind of loose cannons with their emotions, and they're very immature in that way, or even if they are already being, you know, verbally accosted, perhaps even, you know, spanked, which is literally unproductive and counterproductive, leads to more violent people in the future, those kids becoming more violent in the future, studies have shown. It's literally just, you know, child abuse. It's not actually a method of discipline. These kids will understand that, hey, it turns out, you know, I've discovered that I might be not having crushes on girls in school. I'll be having crushes on the boys in my class. And I'm a boy. And my parents probably aren't going to like that. So they don't talk to their parents about it, obviously. And then in order to try to confide in people who won't beat the shit out of them, or ground them, or even like be rude and like verbally accost them for a part of their, you know, being that they can't change, they end up talking to school counselors or their teachers, because these are often actual adults that are more mature and are in a position where they have to be more mature with how they approach things, right? So that's why they talk to the teachers instead, because they, in this case, feel safer talking to the people that give them homework rather than the people that gave them life. That's an indictment on the parents, by the way. This is not an indictment on the kids. This is not an indictment on the teachers. This is an indictment on the parents. If your child trusts their teacher, a person who, theoretically, they probably get annoyed with for the work that they give or the pop quizzes they give or the amount of homework they give, if they trust that person with that kind of information and confide in them sooner than they confide in you, you got to look inward. You got to figure out why that is, because I got to tell you, you are not doing well as a parent. But this is just a means to an end. It's a culture war talking point that has actual real-world ramifications for real people, but they don't care about that because they can use it to distract people with their shiny keys, and then they just go off to, you know, cut taxes for the mega wealthy in tax brackets that you will never reach, while squeezing the lower classes even more and providing them less social safety net programs with the tax revenues that we get, so that the wealthy can get more of those tax revenues, right? That's all it is. But that's what they say, like, oh, these people, they have a right to know what the children are being taught in school. It's like, yeah, and you already know that. You can ask the school for the curriculum. You should have been known about what the fuck your kids are learning in school. That's your fault, that you didn't know until somebody got you mad about it online.
Should know when hospitals are talking about men or women. And we shouldn't get bullied.
We shouldn't get bullied when hospitals are talking about women or men. What the fuck are you talking? This, by the way, this is the same party, the Conservative Party that wants to defund the NHS, that wants to privatize the NHS. The same party that has led to the NHS getting worse and worse over time. But this is what conservatives do, right? It's a brief tangent. They get control of power, often accidentally. They have to then govern, and whatever programs they don't like, they sabotage from within. You had this happen, I believe, in the Bush administration and the Trump administrations, when they appoint people to, say, the EPA, and have them essentially sabotage the EPA from within, and make it less powerful while they're in power, and also if an opposition party gets into power, it makes them less effective then too. Reason being for the EPA, for example, is because they want fossil fuel people, millionaires and billionaires, to make more money and not have as many regulations in place, so that they can make more money. But like, in hospitals, motherfuckers know if they're talking about men or women or not. Because unlike the average conservative, people in hospitals tend to understand basic biology and basic sociology. And they understand that men and women are constructs that we have created in society. And they understand that biological sex also exists and that is also pertinent to medical discussions. So what they do, and it's this crazy idea, they record both of those pieces of information. This might be shocking. You might think it's a lot of book work, but they record both of those pieces of information. Or on the one hand, you'll have the gender that you're assigned at birth, your biological sex, be it male, female, or whatever, and then they will also have the gender identity you identify as. For most people, it'll align with their biological sex, but for some, it won't. There are some people who are intersex as well. And the biological needs of trans people are different than the biological needs of cis people. If you're on HRT for long enough, for instance, or you have had gender-affirming surgeries as a trans person, your biology will end up reflecting more that of, you know, the gender identity you're trying to identify as. So usually it's binary trans people, a trans woman. Her biology will often start to reflect more and more the biology of a cis woman, of a person whose biological sex is female. And because of that, the medical necessities that that person will have are going to change. You cannot give that person the same level of health or the same kind of healthcare as you would a cis man, because they are not a cis man. Their biology has changed. So because people in hospitals, and maybe in the NHS they don't anymore, because they've been so thoroughly defunded by people like Rishi fucking Sunak, because they've been defunded so much, maybe they don't understand basic biology anymore, but they used to, and they understand how this shit works. But it's literally just a means to distract the average person who doesn't think a lot about gender identity, biological sex, you know, and these biological and sociological concepts. That's all that it is. It's just fear-mongering to gain power. And in this case, it's because they got nothing else. And I should say, it's also funny. They said we shouldn't get bullied.
And we shouldn't get bullied.
We shouldn't get bullied. Who the fuck is bullying you? So on the one hand, you have people who actually understand basic biology and basic sociology and are fighting for the rights of an oppressed, marginalized group and trans people. And on the other hand, you got people like Rishi Sunak who are trying to strip them of their rights, of their access to medical care, their access to being treated decently in society, in day-to-day interaction. So on the one hand, you have people who are literally just trying to exist, who want the same access to medical care as everybody else and want to be treated like decent human beings. And on the other hand, you got Rishi Sunak, the conservatives and so-called gender-critical people in the UK, bruv, and transphobes all over the world, who are trying to strip them of their rights, regularly dehumanize them, make fun of them on a daily basis because of their aesthetic presentation. But they're the ones, oh, we're being bullied because we're the ones who are aggressing on people doing nothing wrong. It's just cry bully bullshit. And it's very obvious if you think about it for a couple seconds. And that's why they talk about it in this way, to stop people from thinking about it for those 2 seconds.
And we shouldn't get bullied into believing that people can be any sex they want to be. They can't. A man...
Well, for one, they can, but for two, usually we're talking about gender identity, not biological sex. I know these things are confusing for people, but yeah, that's that. But also, if you're on HRT long enough, and if you get gender-affirming surgeries, your biology actually changes, and then your medical needs change as well, and how you will interact with other people, especially in a romantic or sexual context, will also change. So it's kind of important to understand the distinction, if you want to live in reality, anyway.
Man is a man, and a woman is a woman. That's just common sense.
That's just common sense. You really, as soon as you hear somebody be like, oh, it's just common sense. It's just common sense, love. Mum's life, it's just fucking common sense. Immediately discard their opinion. Common sense is not an argument. That's a feeling.
We should also never be afraid to talk about the thing that matters most to most of us. Family.
Your mother's titties. Oh,
Whenever you want to talk about family, someone whispers, is that wise, Prime Minister? You'll be accused of promoting a one-size-fits-all view. But in this Conservative Party, the party that legislated for same-sex marriage and is investing record amounts in childcare, we know that what matters is that love cascades down the generations.
What the fuck was that? That love cascades down the generations. And it's love to restrict the civil rights and civil liberties of people. It's love. You know, this is our kindness to you. You know, we'll support literal torture in the form of conversion therapy. We'll support bullying people into fitting the worldview that you want, that's contradictory to basic biology and sociology. We'll make laws that criminalize people for living their lives like everybody else, happening to use one loo or another. That's love. And it'll trickle down, just like those economics will, one day. Trust. Put your faith in God about that one. Sex is quite literally nothing but a collection of characteristics, most of which can be changed, altered, or nullified, and those that can't be changed by the endpoint are features that anyone of any sex can have. Doesn't matter if a trans woman has broad shoulders and narrow hips, there's cis women out there with the exact same bone structure. Yup. One day, we will have the scientific capacity to change our chromosomes. One day, we will have the scientific capacity to change our gametes. And at that point, what argument are we going to have from conservatives? Oh, well, you might have so-called correct chromosomes, the so-called correct genitals, the so-called correct outward presentation, the so-called correct biology. But do you have the correct soul? Ah, you didn't think of that one, did you? Do you have the correct soul, the thing that we have no scientific evidence exists? And it's an unwinnable argument at that point. They've won because in order to support that argument, you have to buy into the delusions of souls existing, of God existing, of all these religions being true. Just the Christian one, though. Don't look at Hinduism, don't look at Buddhism, don't look at any other religion out there. The Greek pantheon. All of those ones, they're fake. The one I happen to be born into and was groomed into from an early age as a kid against my will, that one's the correct one. And do not dare tell me it's not, because then I'll understand that I was kind of indoctrinated into this, and that's a scary thought for me. So I'm not going to do it. And people can say, like, oh, isn't that the case for you trans people as well? Aren't you indoctrinated into this from an early... No, actually. So many queer people out there have to find out about queer concepts later in life. And it's like a light bulb moment when they find out, holy shit, I'm fucking gay, brother. Oh my God, I didn't know that was possible. I didn't know you could do that without being made fun of. I didn't know you could do that without being the butt of a joke. I didn't know you could do that without being hate crimed. Motherfuckers do not know shit about queer people, and it's evidenced by the fact that you have people like Rishi fucking Sunak and all the people that support anti-trans and anti-queer politics. It's evident that they don't learn about queer people from being a kid, because if they did in school, they wouldn't be this hateful. They simply wouldn't. We already changed the functions of our DNA with HRT. See methylation patterns of DNA in trans people on HRT. We can already activate/deactivate the SRY gene externally. It's only a matter of time before we learn how to fuck with the gene internally. People just, they hate to see a biohacking monarch winning, frankly. And you hate to see it, you know? They're just hating, I fear. Anyway, Rishi Sunak. So I wanted to, jump from that to this Novara Media article that a lot of people seem to be sharing around. This was posted on the 4th of October, 2023, and it references a 2022 post on translucent.org.uk, women's single-sex spaces in hospitals, where they asked essentially a bunch of NHS foundations if they had ever had any complaints about trans people in single-sex spaces, and it turns out the results may shock you. Our findings after raising 102 Freedom of Information requests to NHS Foundation trusts. When anyone is referred to a hospital, they expect to be treated with respect, privacy, and decency. Obviously, many women prefer female doctors, nurses, and facilities. As a trans woman, I get that. Indeed, I have always had a female GP, and invariably ask for female health practitioners. Most times, but not always, I get my wish. But what happens when the worst-case scenario occurs, and we become an inpatient in a hospital? Hospital wards have been weaponized by some with a trans-exclusionary agenda, often referred to as single-sex hospital wards. Other alleged issues involve prisons, refuges, changing rooms, and even toilets, now all becoming a matter of public discussion. In the UK, bruv, it's like a new species of human being has manifested itself into society. True enough, a moral panic has erupted from nowhere because it is now realized trans women exist. Of course, trans folk have existed for millennia and used hospitals, changing rooms, and toilets without a whimper, but suddenly trans women are a problem. Or are we? Not according to my investigation, we are not far from it. But before we get into the results of over 100 Freedom of Information requests made to NHS Foundation trusts, a short story. I'm not gonna read the short story. That impression is so breathy for me, I'm actually getting lightheaded. I gotta be careful. This is why, by the way, all this shit's popping off in the UK. Because having to keep up that kind of an accent naturally must take a lot out of you if it's making me lightheaded. Motherfuckers not having enough oxygen going to their brains. On December the 22nd, 2021, I made 10 Freedom of Information Act requests to NHS Foundation trusts across the country asking this question. Dear sirs, or madams, or non-binary individuals, I'm already canceling this person. Under the Freedom of Information Act, please could you supply the following information relevant to the period April the 1st, 2020 to March the 31st, 2021. 1. How many natal female inpatients complained that a trans woman inpatient was being cared for in the same ward? The NHSFTs contacted were St. George's University Hospitals NHS Foundation Trust, University Hospital Southampton, Birmingham Women's and Children's NHS Foundation Trust, Hull University Teaching, University Hospitals of Derby and Burton, University Hospitals Birmingham, Manchester University, Royal Devon and Exeter, Nottingham, Liverpool. Most NHSFTs responded within 20 days, the standard statutory requirement, confirming they had not a single complaint concerning a trans woman sharing a ward with a cis woman. However, some of my colleagues felt I should contact more NHSFTs to make sure there were no issues. So on the 28th of February, 2022, I emailed 50 NHSFTs, or Scottish/Irish equivalent, asking 2 different questions and changing the time period. I asked, Dear sirs, under the Freedom of Information Act, could you please supply the following information relevant to the period January the 1st, 2021 to December the 31st, 2021? 1. How many trans women were treated as inpatients in wards designated as, quote, women's wards? 2. How many natal female inpatients complained that a trans woman inpatient was being cared for in the same ward? Again, I got a good response, though all of those who replied said they did not hold the information regarding Q1, that, as I experienced, they invariably treat to medical condition, not sex. In relation to question 2, as in the first wave of requests, no women complained about a trans woman in the ward. Not one. Shockingly, this is not actually a real issue. Also, when you talk about women's prisons, it's not a real issue. Turns out, trans women actually suffer insane amounts of harassment and abuse if they are put in men's prison because they're women. If your argument is a man, quote unquote, being in a women's prison is a risk to those women, well then putting a woman in a man's prison should also then put that woman in danger. But they don't see trans women as women, they see them as men, so they're blind to that because of their ideology. But that's what happens. We have more studies and more evidence to suggest that if you put a trans woman in a men's prison, they are subject to absurd amounts of abuse by the inmates and by the prison workers, the guards. In fact, cis women in women's prisons are subject to more abuse by male prison guards, not any inmates. But don't let reality get in the way of your delusions, conservatives. You know, you can just keep the wool over your eyes. But the allegations about trans women in single-sex hospital wards don't go away, so on October the 25th, 2022, a further 42 FOIRs were made, changing the time period yet again and asking this question. Dear sirs, under the Freedom of Information Act, could you please supply the following information relevant to the period July the 1st, 2021 to June the 30th, 2022? Question, how many natal female patients complained that a trans woman inpatient was being cared for in the same ward? Those contacted were a whole bunch. Sadly, 4 NHSFTs did not reply, even though they were chased up in early December. Still, the results are apparent as 38 did, and the results were precisely the same as before. No complaints, none, zilch. My investigations cover a time period of 2 years and 3 months, and in total I made 102 FOIRs. No NHSFT has reported a woman complaining about a trans woman in her hospital ward from any of the FOIR requests I made. So, what's the problem? Rishi Sunak. What's the issue? Doesn't seem to me like there is one. Doesn't seem to me like there's anything to give a fuck about here. So what are you doing here, man? It seems to me that there actually, there might be an ulterior motive here. And it's not actually a care for women's rights. It's not actually about protecting women and children. It's about gaining power and putting through the agenda you want. That just so happens to further marginalize, oppress, and abuse queer people, but on the plus side, cuts taxes for the mega wealthy and deregulates multinational corporations, making the workers get paid less, work longer hours, in worse conditions, and if you vote for him, you're a mark. I don't know what else to say at this point. I feel like I'm repeating myself. I'm trying to make it fun and engaging and new, but none of this is. Transphobia is a very old bigotry. So, like, a lot of this is mostly feeling new because it's the new culture war. It's the new thing to care about. If you're a conservative and you have nothing else going on in your life, or if the bad shit going on in your life, you don't want to actually think about, you know, the actual root causes of those things, like having a bad paying job, having to work 80 hours a week to put food on the table. That stuff you don't want to think about because that makes you feel bad, so you might as well just get mad at trans people existing, and bada bing, bada boom, you've distracted yourself, along with your tic-tacs and your Facebook posts. It's a whole lot of cope, and it's depressing. And this is not to say that, you know, oh, just because trans people are under attack here, that the other queers are safe. You're not. You never have been. Before the focus was on trans people, it was on gay people by the same exact people. They might pretend to be more okay with gays nowadays, and that's because they have to be. Otherwise, they get negative pushback, rightfully so, by the broader public who understands that gay people exist and it's not a problem. You know, they've learned to understand that at this point. So going out against gay people forcefully in that way and not doing it through dog whistles gets you in trouble. You can't do that anymore. You can't just say the F slur anymore because of wokeness. So now you have to be more coded with it, and you have to attack trans people first as a stepping stone to getting to all queer people. Yes, including you, cisgender, heterosexual, homosexuals. I know what you are. It includes you too. Such is life. And the only silver lining I can give is the only reason these things are happening is because we're winning. It may not feel like it in this moment, and it won't happen without a lot of work from people on the ground, from people, you know, pushing messaging on the issue, trying to educate people. It won't happen without a lot of work. However, we are winning. Activists out there have been winning. And because of that, it is now something that conservatives have to grapple with. We won on gay rights, for the most part. It's not like set in stone, because obviously if trans people are successfully oppressed, they will use that oppression as precedents to then go after gay people and then go after women, though they often do these things simultaneously. Go after black and brown people. Go to the UK, they're not a big fan of Muslim people, you know? Fuck I'm talking about? Oh yeah, it's because we're winning. And they finally have to talk about trans people because it's one of the few marginalized identities where it's okay to talk shit on them. You can't really talk shit on black and brown people as openly. They still do, but they have to be more coded with it. You know, motherfuckers used to just say the N-word in the halls of Congress in the past, but now they can't do that, so you gotta try to find another way to do it. You know, talk about urban crime, talk about so-called gangs and thugs, different ways to essentially say the word without actually saying it. And now they're having to do that with gay people, and they don't have to do that about trans people. They can be a lot more open about it. And, you know, hopefully, if it is true that the arc of history is long, but it bends towards justice, that shit don't bend on its own. You got to push it. We will win in the long run, but there will be a fair amount of suffering in the meantime. So you got to get out there. You got to vote for the best option in the primary, the least bad option in the general. Obviously, Brit-bong elections are different than the US. The voting system is different there, is my understanding. It's a fake country that still somehow has a Showtime fairy tale monarchy for whatever reason. But they also have a parliament where people are elected. It's a fucking clown show over there, and it is over here, but more so over there. At least we don't have a monarchy, except for, you know, the mega wealthy corporations and CEOs that essentially operate as the gilded aristocracy and royalty, but it's less royal families, even though the nepotism. We can do it. It could be good, and I believe. Okay.